evening. So this is the second in a series of talks on the topic of accumulating merit and purification. So last week I talked about accumulating merit, and tonight I'll start the second main point of purification, because that's kind of a big topic, a lot of information. So probably tonight and next week I'll continue talking about that. And there was actually, I was planning last week to lead a meditation on giving, because one of the best ways to accumulate merit is the practice of giving or generosity. And I talked about different ways that we can give, like material giving, giving dharma, giving protection, giving love. So there's different ways we can give, we can practice giving. And for many people that's an easy practice to do. They don't have so much difficulty doing it, and you don't have to meditate. You know, meditation can be very difficult. So you just give to others what you can. And I also mentioned that the real meaning of giving, this is how it's explained in the teachings, the real meaning of giving is the wish to give. It's the attitude, the state of mind of wanting to give. And even if you don't have anything to give, you can still practice giving. So in Tibet and probably many Buddhist countries, there are meditators, practitioners who are like totally dedicated to practicing the Dharma, and many of them are monastics, monks and nuns, and they don't have material things. They don't have money and other things that they can give to others. They just have their robes and their bowls, and they go out on alms round each day and collect the food that they live on. So they don't really have anything to give physically, but they can still practice giving. There's ways you can practice giving even if you don't have anything. And one of those ways is to do it in your imagination, visualize giving. And so there's this really beautiful meditation that Lama Zopa Rinpoche composed. And it's in a book called Wholesome Fear. And it's based on a verse from Shantideva's text, The Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, in which the verse says, "Just like space and the great elements such as earth, water, fire, and air, may I always support the lives of all the boundless creatures." And so this meditation that Rinpoche composed involves giving the four elements of our body. So you've probably heard about this. It's a system existing in Chinese medicine, Asian medicine. They talk about earth, water, fire, and wind, and it's said that all material things are composed of those four elements. That includes our body, right? So we have those four elements within our body. We have the earth. The earth element doesn't mean like dirt, like on the ground. It's the quality of solidity. So it's hardness. So for example, our bones and our teeth have a lot of hardness, a lot of solidity. So that quality of hardness is the earth element. And then the water element, we can see most easily in the fluids in our body, like blood and other fluids that move through our body. In fact, our body is something, 60%, 70% water. Yeah, a lot of water. And then the fire element doesn't mean like flames, but it's heat, right? So our body naturally has heat. Like if you sit on a chair for a while and then you get up, what happens? The chair is warm, right? So our normal temperature, I don't know what it is in Celsius, 36 or something. In Fahrenheit, it's 98.6. That's pretty warm, right? So there's a lot of heat in our body, natural heat. And the heat, or the fire element, is also involved in digestion, right, to digest our food. And then the air element, we can see that in our breathing in and out. But also, the air element allows movement. So, when our body moves, any part of our body moves, that's the air element allowing that. But there's a lot of movement going on inside of our body, like different parts of our body. Blood is moving, cells are moving, there's all kinds of movement happening in our body, and that's due to the air element. So anyway, we have these four elements in our body. There's also the four elements out there in the world. So in this meditation, we imagine the four elements of our body going out and merging with the external four elements, and then transforming into things that will benefit people and living beings. So it's a practice of giving our four elements to make sentient beings happy. So it's really, really beautiful meditation, and so I thought it would be nice to do that, practice giving to sentient beings. Okay, so we'll start with the prayers, do the usual prayers, taking refuge in bodhicitta, and then we'll do generate a good motivation for being here and doing what we're doing here, and then I'll lead the meditation. So while reciting the prayers, you're invited to imagine the Buddha in front of you and try to feel the Buddha really is there. You can also, if you are able to, think of many Buddhas. There's actually many Buddhas and many Bodhisattvas who are around us all the time with love and compassion, ready to help us to practice and do what we need to do to be more happy and free of suffering. So they're very happy when we are doing something that will bring about genuine peace and happiness for ourselves and others. So try to feel the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas are there, listening to our prayers and supporting us in our practice. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By my practice of giving and other perfections, may I become a Buddha to benefit all sentient beings. And the four immeasurables. May all sentient beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. May all sentient beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. May all sentient beings be inseparable from the happiness that is free from suffering. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free from attachment for friends and hatred for enemies. There's a boo-boo there, one extra word. Okay. And then the seventh in prayer, this is to accumulate merit, positive energy, and purify negative energy. Reverently, I prostrate with my body, speech, and mind. I present clouds of every type of offering, actual and imagined. I declare all my negative actions accumulated since beginningless time and rejoice in the merit of all holy and ordinary beings. Please remain until the end of cyclic existence and turn the wheel of Dharma for living beings. I dedicate my own merits and those of all others to the great enlightenment. In the mandala offering, we imagine the whole universe, everything beautiful, pleasing, precious, and offer it to the Buddhas, imagining it as a pure land for them to enjoy, and then wishing all sentient beings to enjoy the pure land. This ground anointed with perfume, strewn with flowers, adorned with Mount Meru, 4 continents, the sun and the moon. I imagine this as a Buddha field and offer it. May all living beings enjoy this pure land. Idam Guru Ratna Mandalakam Niryatayami. Okay, so make yourselves comfortable. If you're sitting on the floor, have your legs crossed in whatever way is comfortable for you. If you're sitting on a chair, just have your legs down, your feet on the floor. And try to keep your back straight to help your mind be more clear and focused, concentrated. But it's also important to be as relaxed as possible. So try not to be holding on to tension anywhere in your body. If there is any tension, see if you can release it, let it go. You can imagine it melting and then flowing down and sinking into the earth below us, disappearing there. Let your mind settle down. Put aside any thoughts you may have of the past or the future, like thinking about things you did earlier today or what you're going to do later tonight, tomorrow, and so on. So remember, we're in the present moment, present place, Amitabha Buddhist Center. So try to just let your awareness be right here, in the here and now, and not in some other place or some other time. And then let's see if we can generate a really positive motivation for being here. So if you're familiar with the bodhicitta motivation, the aspiration to become a Buddha for the benefit of all beings, then you can bring that motivation into your mind. But if you're not so familiar with that, maybe not sure that that's really what you want to do, or if you're able to do it, try to at least have an altruistic motivation, a beneficial motivation. For example, thinking, wishing that what we're doing here tonight will be beneficial for others. It will bring greater peace and happiness to other people and other beings and to the world. And see if you can open your heart to other people and other beings and really feel that you would like to benefit them, to bring them happiness, whatever will help them be more happy and healthy. And with that state of mind, imagine that the earth element of your body absorbs into the external earth element. So again, the earth element is the hardness, the solidity in our body, like in our bones, teeth, flesh, and so on. So imagining the earth element in our body merging with the earth element out there in the world, so it becomes the stable earth and is used by all beings in whatever way they wish for their survival and happiness. It's used as fields to grow the food that people need to eat. And it becomes beautiful parks and forests, which are homes for birds and animals, and where people can go to relax and enjoy nature. It becomes the source for precious jewels, gold and silver that people make into jewelry and other beautiful things. It's the basis for building houses and other buildings, cities and roads, and also becomes the materials that people use to build all of those things. And all those things are important for people to have comfortable and efficient lives. And then your two eyes become the sun and the moon that provide light for all beings. Your flesh becomes food for all beings, whatever they like to eat. Fruits, vegetables, bread, noodles, pizza. Imagine feeding all living beings so that they are satisfied, happy and healthy. Your skin becomes clothes and shoes that people can wear. So imagine all the people and all the beings enjoying these things which have been transformed from the earth element of your body. And then visualize the water element of your body, which is mainly in our bodily fluids like blood. That absorbs into the external water element, which is then used by all beings for their survival and enjoyment. It becomes water and other delicious drinks, juice, Coca-Cola, tea, coffee, and so on. And it becomes water that people use to irrigate their fields, grow their crops, wash their clothes, and make fountains and swimming pools where people can enjoy water sports. So really feel how the water element of your body has brought happiness to all beings. And next, imagine that the fire element of your body absorbs into the external fire element and brings happiness to all beings. It gives warmth to those who are cold. It provides energy for people to cook their food. It gives them light and energy, like electricity, for their computers, their phones, appliances, machinery, and so on. So really feel that the fire element of your body has brought happiness to all beings. Finally, imagine the air element of your body absorbing into the external air element and benefits all beings. It gives them air to breathe. And wind to provide energy, like in places where there are windmills that transform wind into electricity. The air element also enables movement, the ability to move our arms and legs, to walk, run, do sports, and so on. So air is life and freedom. So let yourself be breathed in by all beings, providing life-sustaining oxygen to every cell in their bodies. So feel a sense of joy or rejoicing that we did this meditation. We practice giving by using the 4 elements of our body, just on the mental level, on the level of visualization, but with an altruistic intention, with the wish to bring benefit and happiness to all beings. I feel that this is a good thing to do. So that shows that even if you're materially impoverished and you have nothing to give in terms of actual material, physical things, you can still do the practice of giving. But that doesn't mean that then if you do have things to give, you can think, oh, I'm not going to give these things. I'll just imagine that I'm giving. That's kind of cheating. So if we do have things that we can give, that we can share with others, then it's good to do that as well, because they really need, so many people and living beings are in need, and it's good if we can share what we have with others. So just before I go on, today at lunch, we were having a discussion about something I talked about last week. Right at the end of the class, I mentioned 4 different motivations that we can have for when we do something virtuous. And one is the bodhicitta motivation, wanting to become enlightened to help all living beings. And then there's the motivation of renunciation, wanting to attain nirvana, free ourselves from samsara and all its suffering. And then another motivation is having a good rebirth, a good life in our next incarnation. After this life ends, wanting to have a good rebirth. And then the 4th motivation is just wanting good things in this life, like success, health, wealth, and so forth. And I said that, the best motivation is the first one, because if we have that as our motivation for the things we do, everything else will come as well. We'll get all the other good things as well. But yeah, realistically, it takes time. We have to learn about the Dharma, we have to think about the Dharma, and especially the Lamrim, the path to enlightenment. It takes time to understand it, and also we need to check our situation and our ability and determine, is that really something I want to do? Is that really something I'm able to do? So realistically, it could take time, maybe even a number of years, before we make the decision that this is what I want to do. And for some people, you may feel, no, that's not really for me. I want to do something else, follow some other path, some other tradition. But yeah, we do need to investigate that and think about that and decide for ourselves if we do really want to follow the path to enlightenment for the benefit of all beings. And so, so especially in the beginning, when you're still learning the Dharma and trying to decide what you want to do, you can't really have that motivation, the bodhicitta motivation, and it may be difficult to have renunciation as well and the wish to attain nirvana. And realistically, where most people are at is they're trying to be happy here and now. We want to have good health and good relationships with others and success in our work and so on and so forth. So, and there's nothing really wrong with having the wish to do those things, as long as we aren't going about it in some kind of harmful way, like stealing and killing and so on, harming others in our pursuit of our own happiness. So we definitely want to avoid that. So as long as we're behaving in good ways and ethical ways, virtuous ways, in order to get the happiness of this life, then that's actually a good thing. And the point in the Dharma is, the Dharma teachings are trying to encourage us to look beyond this life, to have higher goals and work for higher goals like enlightenment, and not just be focused only on this life. But I think realistically, everybody does have to spend a certain amount of time focusing on this life. And I've heard the Dalai Lama say that, when he talks about this kind of point, he says his recommendation is half your time for this life and half your time for future. And that seems like a good balance, a good deal, yeah. I mean, there are cases of people who can completely give up their concern for this life and just totally focus on working for higher goals like enlightenment. But most people aren't able to do that. Most of us, we still have to take care of this life. And many of us have responsibilities, taking care of other people, parents, children, other relatives, and so on, and have a job. And so, realistically, we do need to spend a certain amount of time taking care of the things of this life. And it's not wrong to do that as long as we go about it in an ethical way. We're doing it ethically. But it's also good to try to, incorporate some Dharma practice working for higher goals, like next life, liberation, and enlightenment. So I like the Dalai Lama's advice, half-half. Okay, so tonight I'll start talking about the other main practice, which is purification. And so the point is that if we do wish to attain enlightenment or nirvana or even a fortunate rebirth in our next life, then we need to do both of these practices. We need to accumulate merit. Merit is the cause of happiness, good experiences, good things in future lives. So we got to make sure we are creating the causes for that, because those things aren't going to just come from the sky, or arise without any causes. So happiness and good experiences in the future depend on us creating merit or virtue. And then purification is about clearing away negative energy that gets in the way, that stands in the way of our happiness and accomplishing goals like liberation and enlightenment. So these two practices are like complementary. They complement our other practices such as meditation, studying, and meditating on the Lam Rim. So purification means like clearing away, getting rid of things in our mind that are the cause of problems and suffering. And there's different levels of purification, but in the beginning we mainly start with purifying gross, really gross problems like our negative karma. And then later in our practice, we can purify more subtle things like the delusions, the afflictions in our mind that motivate us to do negative actions in the first place. And again, why we need to purify is to avoid problems, to avoid suffering, and to attain happiness and good experiences. So we'll be talking about karma. I don't know if everyone here has studied karma, but in case you're not so familiar with karma, we'll be going through that, because the more we understand karma and how karma works, then the more it makes sense the practice of purification, what that is for. But I thought to start by just talking about Buddha nature. I think this is one of the most beautiful, positive, optimistic teachings that can be found anywhere in any religion, any spiritual tradition. And this is a quotation from a Pali sutra called the Pabhasara Sutra in the Anyutta Nikaya. So the Buddha said, he's talking to monks, bhikkhus, he says, luminous, bhikkhus, is this mind, but it is defiled by adventitious defilements. Luminous, monks, is this mind, and it is freed from adventitious defilements. So the term that is translated here as luminous is the same term that we use in the Tibetan tradition, and we translate as clear light. So you've probably heard about that. It's used a lot, especially in Tantra. Clear light, usel, that's the Tibetan term, usel, and in Sanskrit it's pravasvara, which is the same as the Pali, the name of the sutra, Pabhasara. So the translator is actually Bhikkhu Bodhi who did this translation. So he decided to translate that term as luminous, and Tibetan, when it's translated in Tibetan, we usually call it clear light, but it's the same term, yeah? So it could be translated either way. And there's a lot of talk about clear light in Tibetan Buddhism, especially in Tantra, but also in Sutra. And I was really happy to find that the Buddha talked about this in the Pali Canon as well. Yeah, so it really goes back to the earliest teachings of the Buddha. So what this verse, or this very brief passage, is saying is that although there are defilements in our mind, and defilements can include things like greed, hatred, ignorance, jealousy, pride, and so forth, these states of mind or emotions that come up in our mind and make our mind sort of disturbed and agitated and unhappy. So even though such things exist in our mind, they are not permanent, but impermanent. The term adventitious in this quote says, what that means is that it's possible to remove the defilements. They're not like permanent fixtures that will be there forever and ever and ever and ever and can't be removed, but they're like pollution. I find it helpful to think of an example like water. The nature of water, when water is coming up from a spring in the ground, or it's coming from a glacier in the mountains, it's totally pure. It doesn't have any contamination in it, any pollution. We can just drink it, and it's really good for us. But sometimes it happens that water gets polluted, usually from human activity, chemicals and our detergents and waste products. So that can get into the water, and then the water becomes polluted. But the pollution isn't really a permanent part of the water. It isn't the natural quality of the water. It's kind of added in, and it can also be removed. So there's systems for purifying water, right? I'm sure in Singapore you know that very well. Lots of purified water here. So it's possible to run the water through this filtration process and remove all the pollution, and then have just pure, healthy water. So in a similar way, the defilements in the mind, like the greed, hatred, ignorance, and so on, and our karma, bad karma, those things are like pollution in the mind. They're not a natural quality of the mind. They're not things that are going to be in our mind forever and ever and ever, but they can be removed. So that's what the Buddha is saying here. He's saying the mind, our mind is by nature luminous, or clear light if you want, but it's defiled, and these defilements are adventitious, they're impermanent, and it can be freed. So the last line says, luminous, monks, is this mind, and it is freed from adventitious defilements. So what the Buddha is saying is that, yeah, the defilements in the mind can be removed, and the mind can be brought to a state of total purity. And it can be transformed by removing the defilements in the mind, and then developing the positive qualities of the mind, like compassion, love, wisdom, concentration. Then the mind can be brought to a state of incredible peace and perfection, like nirvana, enlightenment, Buddhahood. And so this is what we call Buddha nature. Yeah? That's the real nature of the mind. And everyone who has a mind, every sentient being, even those who are really, really confused and negative and doing harmful things, or mentally ill and so on. So even beings like that have this potential. Their mind is by nature luminous or clear, and not permanently mixed with the defilements, but the defilements can be removed. So the Buddha did that with his mind. He discovered how to do it, and then he explained how to do it, how we can purify our mind and transform our mind. And then, so those, that explanation is found in the Buddha's teachings. And then in later centuries, Indian masters and then Tibetan masters took the Buddha's teachings and arranged them in a step-by-step manner, showing what we need to do step by step to get from where we are now with lots of defilements in our mind to the state of Buddhahood, where all the defilements have been cleared away. So this is what we call the Lam Rim, the stages of the path. This is the main kind of teachings that we learn and practice in our tradition. So by learning and practicing, meditating on the Lam Rim, we will be able to gradually transform our mind and reach enlightenment. But in addition to learning and meditating on the Lam Rim, we also need to do these other practices like purification and accumulating merit. So we need to, I talked about accumulating merit last week, and now we'll look at purification. So, so we can go to the next slide. And I mentioned that to really understand purification, we need to understand karma. So I'm sure many of you, most of you maybe, have already heard about karma, but hopefully you won't be bored going through this again. It doesn't hurt to hear it again and again and again, because it is a really important topic. So we'll start by just looking at a few quotations about karma from the Buddha. Karma is the Sanskrit term, and kama is in Pali. But usually we use the Sanskrit term karma. So in case anybody has a doubt that the Buddha did talk about karma, there may be some people who think that karma wasn't something the Buddha taught. Here's some quotations from the Buddha. So the first says, beings are the owners of their karma, heirs of their karma. They originate from their karma. They are bound to their karma. They have karma as their refuge. It is karma that distinguishes beings as inferior and superior. And karma the word karma means action. So karma is talking about actions that we do, and we can do actions in 3 ways: with our body, physical actions, with our speech when we talk, and also just with our mind, just with our thoughts, what's going on inside of us that nobody else may know about, but we do. So with our mind, we can also create karma. So anytime we act in any of those 3 ways, then an imprint is left on our mind, like a seed is planted in our mind, and that will become the cause of experiences that we have later on in the future, this life, future lives, and so on. And basically we divide karma into good and bad, or virtuous and non-virtuous. So we'll look at the details of that soon. But there's this other quotation on this slide. I think it's from a Vinaya text. Vinaya are the teachings mainly from monks and nuns, the precepts that we take and how to keep our precepts and what to do if we break them and so on. So I think it's in the Vinaya text that we find this quote. Do not commit any non-virtuous actions, perform only perfect virtuous actions, subdue your mind thoroughly. This is the teaching of the Buddha. So this verse is kind of like a synthesis of the Buddha's teachings. It's, just 4 lines, or really just 3 lines, but it contains a lot. This is kind of the essential message of the Buddha, to try our best to avoid doing anything that's non-virtuous, try to do what is virtuous, and then try to work on our mind, to subdue our mind, tame our mind, meaning work on overcoming the afflictions like anger, hatred, greed, jealousy. Okay, so those are not permanent, they are impermanent, and there are things we can do about them to reduce them. And so the next slide is looking at the general characteristics of karma. So this is from the Lamrim. This is explained in the Lamrim. And it's helpful to use the analogy of growing crops or growing vegetables, which we know very well. You put seeds in the ground, either in a field or in a garden or even in a flower pot. You put a seed in, you make sure that the soil is healthy, it has fertilizer, nutrients. You water, make sure it has enough water, and eventually the sprout will come up, and then will keep growing and turn into whatever flower or a tomato plant or whatever. Okay. So the process of karma is kind of similar to that. And karma is something inside of us. It's something happening in our mind. We can't see it. It's not visible to our eyes. So to understand karma, it's helpful to use, as an analogy, something that we can see, something that is visible, like plants, growing plants. So these 4 general characteristics are like, attributes of karma, how the law of karma works. So the first one is that karma is definite. What that means is that there's a definite correlation between the kind of action we do and the kind of effect or result that we experience. In the sense that if we do something virtuous, we do a virtuous, positive action, the result of that will be good, will be happiness, some kind of good experience. But if we do a non-virtuous action, the result of that will be something bad, something painful, something unpleasant. And so it can never be the other way. It can never be that you do something virtuous and the result you get will be bad, suffering. Nor can you do something non-virtuous and get, as a result, happiness, good experiences. And this is similar to what we have in nature. Depending on what kind of seed you plant, you get that kind of plant. So if you want tomatoes, you have to plant tomato seeds. You can't plant pumpkin seeds and expect to get a tomato plant, right? That just doesn't work. So there's always a correlation between the cause, like the seed that you plant, and then the result, the kind of plant that you will get. But then with karma, how do we know which actions are negative and which ones are positive? How do we know if an action is negative or positive? So one way to understand that is it's in the first two verses of the Dhammapada, which you probably read. Buddha talks about if you act with a negative mind, if you do an action with a negative mind, the result will be suffering. If you act with a positive mind, a pure mind, the result will be happiness. Have you come across those verses? I don't have them here with me right now, but they're very famous. So that's talking about the state of mind that we have for doing an action, the motivation we have for doing an action. So if our motivation is negative, like we want to make somebody suffer, we're angry at somebody and we want them to suffer, and so we have this mind of hostility, of harmfulness. So acting with that state of mind, that becomes non-virtue, negative, and the result will be suffering. But then if our state of mind is positive, virtuous, like wanting to help somebody, feeling compassion, we see somebody is unhappy or they've fallen down and they're in pain, they need help, and we feel moved. We feel, oh, this person needs help, this person is suffering, and we want to help them. So anything we do with that motivation, that state of mind, that becomes virtuous. So it's the state of mind or the motivation we have that determines if an action is virtuous or non-virtuous. But in his teachings, the Buddha also explained that certain actions are negative or non-virtuous. Like he gave a list of 10 non-virtuous actions, which we'll look at a little bit later. So he said, if you don't want to suffer, if you want to stop creating bad karma, the cause of suffering, then avoid those 10 actions. And then there's a corresponding list of 10 virtuous actions, which are the opposite to the 10 non-virtuous actions. So that gives us a kind of a good basis to start working on karma. We try to avoid or refrain from the non-virtuous actions as much as we can, try to create the virtuous actions as much as we can. And then the second of these 4 characteristics is that karma increases. So what that means is that if we do something negative, we do a negative action, even if it's a small one, and we don't apply any kind of counter force, like purification practice, then the karma increases and it will bring numerous unpleasant results. So it isn't that there's just a 1-to-1 ratio. You do one negative action, you get one bad result. But you can get many bad results from one action, especially if you don't do anything to purify. But it also works on the positive side, on the virtuous side. If you do one virtuous action, even something small, and if it doesn't get if there's no counter force to it, then it will bring many positive results, many good results. And this is also something we see in nature. For example, like an apple tree. You plant one small seed in the ground, and eventually that becomes an apple tree, which is very large, many branches, and every year then it grows leaves and flowers and fruits, apples. Yeah, you can get hundreds of apples every year from just one apple tree, which came from one seed. So one small cause can bring many results. And in the Dhammapada, there's a few verses where the Buddha explained this. He said, even a tiny evil deed can cause great ruin and trouble in the world that lies beyond, like poison that has entered the body. Even small meritorious acts bring happiness to future lives, accomplishing a great purpose, like seeds becoming bounteous crops. So, in case you have any doubt about this idea, then those are the words of the Buddha explaining that. So the idea then is to really try our best to look after even small actions and not think, oh, I can tell this little white lie, or I can steal this little thing, nobody's going to notice. So even if it seems to be a small action, minor action, it can still bring a lot of results. And likewise, when it comes to virtuous actions, even if it's something small, like just offering one stick of incense or one candle, or giving one coin to a person who's poor, who's a beggar. Yeah, it may seem like something small, but that can bring many good results. And then the third characteristic is that if we don't create the cause, we won't get the result. So we can see that in nature. You may have a field, you may have a garden, and you think, oh, I would really like to have corn or tomatoes or flowers. But just wishing that, will that happen? If you don't go through the work of, tilling the ground and putting the seeds and watering them and taking care of them, yeah? So if you don't do those things, if you don't do the right causes, then you won't get the result you want. So in a similar way with karma, if we don't create the cause, meaning an action, if we don't do a particular action, we won't get the result of that action. So on the negative side, that means that if we don't create negative karma, we don't do non-virtuous actions, then bad things won't happen to us, suffering won't happen to us. And if on the virtuous side, if we don't create virtue, if we don't create good karma, we won't get the good results of that, the happiness that comes from that. So this principle explains why it is that there's sometimes these incidents that happen, like a car accident or a plane crash, and some people are killed or injured and others are not, right? You've heard of those kind of stories, and it's almost like, how can that be? I remember once, many years ago, there was this plane crash. It was a Korean Air plane, and it had hundreds of passengers, and it was a terrible tragedy. Everybody was killed except a little baby. I don't know if anybody remembers that. It was just like, what? All these adults were killed, and then they found this little baby in the wreckage of the plane, and it was still alive. I was like, oh, how is that possible? But yeah, there are things like that happen. So it said that, well, the ones who were killed had the karma to die. The ones who survived didn't have that karma. And it can also explain things like in business. Some people might have an MBA, and a lot of knowledge about how to start a business, and they try to start a business, but it fails. And then somebody else doesn't have an MBA, they haven't gone to school, they haven't studied, business management, but they start a business and it does really well. Yeah? Are there cases like that? I'm sure. So, yeah, Buddhism would say, well, it's karma. It's not enough just to have knowledge, but we also need to have the karma to be successful in the things that we do. So we can look at this particular characteristic in terms of the future. Okay, if we're looking ahead, and what kind of experiences do we want in the future? Okay, and am I creating the causes for those? We have to make sure we are going in the right direction, doing the right things that will bring those results in the future. But we can also look at this in terms of our present life connected with the past, like the things that happened to us in this lifetime are the result of actions that we did in the past. So nobody wants bad things happening. Nobody wants bad experiences, but they happen to us. In spite of all our efforts to avoid them, they still happen. And that's because of karma that we created in the past and didn't purify. So it may be hard in the beginning to fully accept karma. You need to think about it, investigate it. But if we can understand karma and accept karma, that helps us to have a sense of responsibility instead of blaming others, which is very common. Many people, when they face a problem, something bad happens to them, they try to find others to blame. It's his fault, it's her fault, my parents' fault, the government's fault, So we're pointing our finger at others as the cause of our suffering and problems. And there may be some contribution from other people, but Buddhism says the main cause is our own karma we created in the past. So, if we can understand that, it can really help us to be more calm and peaceful and accepting when problems do happen, instead of getting angry and blaming others and feeling life is unfair, the world is unfair. And then we can do something about it. So one thing, people sometimes think karma is like fate. If you create karma, you have to experience the result. There's no way around it. That isn't true. Karma isn't like fixed, like carved in stone. It's something that can be changed. We can change our karma. We can purify negative karma, thank goodness. And also, unfortunately, virtuous karma can be damaged. We don't want that to happen, so we have to make sure we don't do that. But the point is that it's fluid, it's flexible, it's something changeable rather than fixed and definite. Then the fourth characteristic is karma that we create doesn't get lost on its own. So once we do an action, once we create a karma, if we don't do something about it, like if we don't purify a negative karma, it stays in our mind. That karmic seed remains in our mind even when we die and we go to the next life. Our karmic seeds go with us. They don't fall off. They don't get lost somewhere, but they stay with our mind even over numerous lives until they meet with the right conditions to ripen and bring their result. So that applies both to virtuous karma and non-virtuous karma. And again, there's some verses in the Dhammapada where the Buddha talked about this. He said, if you have done something wrong or are involved in wrong and run away hoping to hide the fact, it is no use. There is no escape. There exists no place at all, but what you have done will follow you in the oceans, through the skies, or far off in mountain caves. Whether it was good or bad, the power of any action once performed is never lost. The results arise accordingly. So if we do some negative action and we maybe commit a murder and we try to run away, you might be able to evade the law. Right? People sometimes hide, or they go to some other country and they change their name and they manage to not get caught by the police. But you can't get away from your karma. There's no place you can go where your karma will not go with you. Your karma will be there. So sooner or later, eventually, you will have to experience the results of your karma. But there is exceptions to this with regard to negative karma, non-virtuous karma, that can be purified if we do the practice of purification, which I will explain. And so that's why purification is so important, so that we can avoid the bad results of our actions, our non-virtuous actions, and not have to experience them. And so it's recommended, in our tradition, it's recommended that we do a purification practice every day. A good time to do it is at night before going to sleep. Just take a little bit of time, think back over your day. Did I do anything wrong, non-virtuous, something I feel regret for? And if you did, then do some purification practice before going to sleep. But you can also purify things that we did in the past, even as, in childhood. So it often happens that when people start to learn the Dharma and listen to the teachings and practice meditation and so on, that we remember things that we did when we were kids. Oh, I stole, I went fishing, I was nasty to my classmate, I was really mean to her, to him, and so on. So we remember these things that we probably forgot about a long time ago, but they come up in our mind. And that's good. It's good that we remember those things so that we can then use the purification practice to purify those things. So it's never too late. Never too late. Even after many years, we can purify things. And then with good karmic seeds, virtuous karma, like when we create virtue, we practice giving, like the meditation we did earlier, or we actually give material things. So by doing that kind of action, we create virtue, and that is good karma, and that is the cause of happiness, good experiences in the future. But unfortunately, it's possible that good karma can be damaged or even destroyed. One of the main causes of that is anger, getting angry. So that's why anger is such a horrible state of mind. Not only does it make our mind disturbed and disturbs other people, and we create bad karma, but another effect of anger is it destroys or damages good karma we created, virtuous karma that we created. And that's really tragic because, it takes some effort to create virtue. You put all this time and energy into doing virtuous things, you collect this virtuous karma, and then that can be destroyed or damaged by getting angry. So I think it's a bit like if you work, you have a job, you work for a week or a month, and then you get your paycheck, you get your salary at the end of that time, so you get this money, and then if it fell into the fire, right? If that money fell into a fire, we'd be pretty upset. all that hard work we put in, and it all gets burned up. So it's a bit like that with our virtuous karma. So we don't want to do that, right? We want to make sure that we don't destroy our good karma. And so to prevent that from happening, we try to not get angry. But it's also, it's said that if we dedicate the merit we create, we create virtue, create merit, and then we dedicate that merit to enlightenment, which we do. We have these prayers where we dedicate our merit to enlightenment. So it's said that doing that will protect the merit, the virtue, so that it won't be damaged, won't be destroyed by getting angry and so on. So it's a bit like putting your money in a bank, making sure it doesn't get lost or destroyed. So the next slide, we look at the 10 non-virtuous actions. So these are the ones that the Buddha mentioned. These are the main types of non-virtues that we should try to avoid if we don't want to suffer. So they're divided into 3 groups, whether we do them with our body, with our speech, or with our mind. So the first 3 are bodily actions, physical actions. Killing is taking the life of any living being, mainly human beings, of course. But in Buddhism regards all living beings as worthy of respect. They have minds, so even animals, birds, fish, insects, they have minds, and they have thoughts and feelings, and they don't want to suffer. They don't want to be killed. You can see that, right? They run away when you approach them with a sort of threatening, aggressive behavior. They don't want to be harmed. They don't want to be killed. And so killing is to cause the greatest suffering, the greatest harm to any living being. We know that ourselves. We wouldn't want to be killed. We wouldn't want anyone to come along and kill us. That would be horrific. So every living being feels that way too. So it's causing a huge amount of suffering if we kill. But not only do we cause suffering to the victim, we also cause suffering to ourselves, because we create negative karma that will bring suffering, problems in the future. And then stealing is taking what doesn't belong to us. It also includes not paying money that we owe. So if you have a debt, if you owe money to somebody and you try to run away and not pay it, or if we owe money to the government, taxes, or even bus fares, cinema fares, yeah, so if we don't pay what we owe, that's also stealing. And then number 3 is unwise sexual behavior, or sometimes it's called sexual misconduct. In general, that refers to any kind of sexual behavior that causes suffering. So the usual one mentioned is adultery. If you have a partner or spouse, committed relationship, and then you have sex with someone else outside of that relationship, you're cheating on your partner, you're cheating on your spouse. And people usually try to, do it without them knowing, but I think they usually find out, and they're pretty unhappy, right? Maybe some of you have been in that situation. You've been the one who was cheated on, and it's painful, painful to go through. So it causes suffering to the one who's being cheated on. And then any other kind of sexual behavior like rape or child abuse, any harmful actions that are done in the process of having sex. So those are unwise, unkind sexual behavior. So then the next four are actions of speech, things we do with our speech: lying, telling lies, saying what's not true. Divisive speech is when you talk in a way that causes division, disharmony. There's two people who are friends, who get along with each other, and maybe because of jealousy. This happens because of jealousy. You're jealous of that relationship, of their closeness. So you kind of talk to one about the other. You say, you know, so that they don't get along with each other and they may break up. So that's divisive speech. And this also happens between groups of people, even between countries, right? When countries or groups of people don't like each other, then there's a lot of this kind of talk that goes on about the others, and it increases hatred, it increases aggression. One of the greatest examples of this was what happened in Rwanda a number of years ago between I can remember, what are they, the Hutus and the Tutsis, is that right? Yeah, those two groups of people. And they just, I mean, I don't know how many million, more than 1 million people, I think, were murdered, horribly, horribly murdered, just because of hatred. And people were stirring up the hatred, yeah, going on the radio and just saying these nasty things about the other group and just stirring people up to go out and kill them. So that's like the worst result of this type of speech. But yeah, it just leads to a lot of suffering. And then 6 is harmful speech. That's just like insulting people, speaking harshly, hurting their feelings. Yeah, so any speech that hurts another person is harmful speech. And then 7 is idle talk. Sometimes it's called gossip. One favorite pastime of human beings. Just sitting around and talking, telling stories about people, who's doing this, who's doing that, who's going out with so-and-so, who's breaking up with so-and-so. But it can also, not just about people, but politics and movies and sports and food and fashions. So talking about things that aren't particularly meaningful. And the reason this is on the list of non-virtues is because engaging in such conversation can increase our afflictions. It can increase our desire, our attachment. It can also increase our anger, our aversion, negative feelings. But it can also waste a lot of time that could be used more constructively, more beneficially. You know, we can spend hours doing this kind of talk, even all night. Sometimes people stay up all night talking about things. And if you look back on that and say, was that time well spent? Was that a good thing to do? So it doesn't seem to be particularly harmful, but because of, using so much of our time is precious, and there's so many good things we could be doing, and because it can increase our afflictions, so it's better to try to reduce that as much as we can. And then the last 3 are actions of mind. Covetousness is where you want something that belongs to somebody else. So like you go to somebody's house and you're kind of looking around and checking out what they have, and you see something that you really like. And then you start thinking, how can I get that? I really want that for myself. Maybe if I ask them in a really nice way, they'll give it to me. Or, maybe when they're not looking, I'll just put it in my pocket. So you may never do anything, but just that state of mind of, it's like desire, attachment to something that doesn't belong to you, and then you start thinking about, how can I get it for myself? That's covetousness. And number 9 is malice, and that's involved with anger or hatred, when you're angry at somebody and you start thinking about what you can do to make them suffer. You start planning, what can I say, what can I do that will hurt them. Again, you may not act out those thoughts, but just having those thoughts in your mind, indulging in those thoughts is non-virtuous. And then the last one is wrong views. This has to do with views that are important for our spiritual practice. For example, the existence of karma, the actions that we do bringing about results that will come in the future. Some people reject that. Some people say, no, that's not true, that's nonsense. They refuse to believe it. And that's actually dangerous, because if you don't believe in karma, then you'll think it doesn't matter what I do. I can do anything, and as long as I don't get caught by the police, it'll be okay. There won't be any consequences. So that's one of the worst wrong views that we could have, rejecting karma, not believing in karma. It's more than just having doubt. It's natural to have doubt, to think, is it true or not? I don't know. I want to check it out. It's going beyond that. It's actually deciding, no, I don't believe it. I refuse to believe it. There's no space in your mind to believe in karma. So that's just a brief explanation of these 10. There's a lot of details. And in fact, the FPMT has a little booklet I kind of worked on it partly a number of years ago. So anyone who's interested and wants to know more about this, we can make that available. Do you know anything about that booklet? I have the file. I could email it to somebody, and then anybody who wants it, you could get it, because it goes into all the different details of these 10. Because karma is actually kind of complicated. Each action that we do is different because of different factors that we have, like our motivation and the object in relation to whom we do the action, and how we do the action, and so on. So there's different factors that play into an action being more negative or less negative, more virtuous or less virtuous. So we've run out of time for now, but I'll talk a little bit about that next time. So we have a few minutes left of this session. If anyone has a question you'd like to ask. This one. Wait, use the microphone.
Thank you, Venerable. Can I ask you about the killing? So what if, let's say, we kill with good intention? Say, for instance, killing mosquitoes to prevent the spreading of disease. So is that considered non-virtuous?
Yeah, that's a tricky one. Yeah, because mosquitoes can transmit illness, disease, like dengue fever, malaria, and so on. So that's always a tricky thing. Especially if you're working in public health, and you're responsible for the health of a community, and you don't want people to get sick. So, I mean, if you're not in that kind of position, if it's just your own home, because I lived here in Singapore for many years, and for quite a few years I lived in a sort of ulu place where there was a lot of trees around and a lot of mosquitoes, and I managed to avoid killing them. I mean, I didn't have children around that I needed to protect, but there are things you can do to protect yourself and to protect your family without killing. You can use mosquito nets, you can use cream repellent, mosquito repellent, and so on. You can just take care about leaving water around. So prevention is much better if we can prevent ourselves from being bitten by mosquitoes. But I also heard in Singapore they did this experiment with sterilizing mosquitoes. And I heard it was successful. They managed to, I don't know if that eliminated all the mosquitoes, but just to make them so they can't breed, they can't increase. So was that effective? Did that help? And that didn't involve killing them. It just. They were sterile. Is that the word? Huh? Less productive, yeah. So it's better to try to find solutions like that don't involve killing. Yeah.
Is there any difference? What is the difference between repentance and purification that you just mentioned?
Oh, I think they're the same. I think it's just a different word. I think in the Chinese tradition, like Chinese temples, groups, they use the word repentance, yeah. But I don't know if the practice that they do is exactly the same as what we do. I haven't looked into that, but we haven't gotten to that yet. I'm still talking about karma. But then next week I'll continue and I'll explain.
Come next week.
What?
So I must come next week.
You have to come next week. Well, it's up to you. I think the talks are also recorded and they're on YouTube, and is it YouTube? So you can watch them later. But yeah, in our tradition, the practice of purification has 4 steps, what are called the 4 opponent powers. So it takes a bit of time to explain those, but I will do that next week. Yeah. So how we purify. But yeah, I think in the Chinese tradition they probably have something similar. They just call it repentance.
It's just very simple. I don't know, we just usually chant a few verses. So I'm not too sure whether that is the exact thing, or how is it different from the 4 steps that
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah.
I'll find out next week.
Yeah, so I hope that the takeaway for tonight is that you feel that, yeah, purification practice is something valuable, something important to do so that we can, I mean, we're just unenlightened beings, we have afflictions, we have habits, and it's just natural that as we go through life, we sometimes create negative karma, bad karma. But the good news is it's not like fate, it's not destiny. We can do something about that karma and purify it and clear it away. And they say actually there's no karma that is so bad that it can't be purified. So even murder, even multi-murders like Angulimala, one disciple of Buddha who killed 999 people. I mean, that must be a record. But he was able to purify that and even become an arhat, attain nirvana in that same lifetime. So that shows that, yeah, if we strongly regret what we've done and are determined to change and stop doing those things and do the right things, then we can purify. It's not impossible. So we'll stop there for tonight and continue next week. And then at the end, I think on the 23rd, a Sunday, we'll have a day of practice so we can practice together these things like purification. So let's complete this session with the dedication prayers. Make sure we dedicate our merit so that it doesn't get lost in case we get angry afterwards. Yeah, so remember the motivation we had at the beginning of wanting to benefit others. So now we share the merit, the positive energy we've created with others, wishing that it will bring them happiness and peace and ultimately enlightenment. Due to the merits of these virtuous actions, may I quickly attain the state of a Guru Buddha and lead all living beings without exception into that enlightened state. May the supreme jewel bodhicitta that has not arisen arise and grow, and may that which has arisen not diminish, but increase more and more. So thank you.